All right, so so for the last couple meetings of this class, we're going to talk specifically about some conservation and management related issues. So we've kind of covered all of the, not all, but most of the theory related to stream ecology. And so now we should have a pretty good handle on what happens when we start messing with these ecosystems, right? So we began with the river continuum concept. We talked about energy processing. We talked about processes like competition and predation. We talked about what limits productivity, all these different things. And so now when we look at how we disturb stream ecosystems, we should be able to kind of predict what's going to happen, right? So one of those impacts is construction of dams. So this is an image from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers National Inventory of Dams. I know some of y'all have seen this picture before, but I think it's easy to forget about what a massive change to the landscape damming up rivers has been until we step back and we look at a figure like this. And so every dot represents a dam. That's kind of a weird projection, isn't it? Looks at the US. It's really like wide now. And so what this has done, so every dot is a dam, and then they're coded by height. And so the dark green are smaller dams, 0 to 25 feet. The red are larger. What jumps out at you from this graphic? Anything? Yeah, good. Right along here, along the coastal plain. Some shorter dams. Anything else? Yeah, absolutely. So this is like the Tennessee Valley Association here. This is out west. Yeah, and so California's got some really big dams out west. So yeah, definitely clumped. There's a lot of small dams. Yeah, in the Midwest. I mean, there's a lot more small dams than big dams, which is kind of one of the important things to keep in mind. But anybody care to take a guess at how many there are? Anybody who saw this figure before remember how many there were? I'd be impressed if you did. 2,000. Any other estimates? I need a prize. When I ask for these kinds of guys, I need a prize. Like Price is Right. 10,000. We've just increased by a factor of 5. Well, I'm sorry, you all underbid. 71,000. It's a lot of dams. Damn, it's a lot of dams. Sorry, this is acting weird. Oh, I know why it's acting weird. Because I don't have it plugged in. Now it might act more normal. So it's interesting to ask like when we were creating dams and what those dams were like. So we're building most dams post World War II, so 1950s and 1960s. Those were the peak dam building years in the U.S. That time when the country was growing economically pretty rapidly, right? We're building suburbs, needed electricity in fast-growing urban areas, particularly out west, and hydroelectricity provided a lot of those. Also, as we'll see in a second, we built dams just for recreation, not really for any particular energy-producing reason. I was sharing this with Torin when I taught restoration, ecosystem restoration. I think 2 times ago, we went and visited the Mills River, and we talked with this guy named Jerry, who had been an environmental activist back in the 70s, 60s or 70s, I can't remember. And there was a proposal, you guys, I'm not kidding, to straighten about 30 miles of the French Broad River near Asheville. Straighten it, like channelize 30 miles of it, and then construct 15 dams on the tributaries of the French Broad River all through here. So there would have been a dam on the Mills, dam on the Davidson, dam on the Little River, dam on the Swananoa River, one up in the headwaters near Rosman of the upper French Broad. Crazy, like all of those beautiful rivers, they all would have been reservoirs, all of them. And this was kind of in this time. I bet it must have been the 60s or 70s. I can't remember what he said, but there was this proposal, and so they literally like wrote to the president. I don't know who the president was at that time, but they wrote to, and so it eventually got canceled. But there's a plan like, you just think how different this part of the country would be if there was a straight river and lots of reservoirs instead of like all of the beautiful rivers which we have now. It kind of boggles the mind, but it's kind of cool because people objected and it didn't happen. But we like to build dams in that time. So what do you think most of these dams are built for? If you're building a dam, why would you build it? Energy? So now remember, this is all those dams, right? If we were to just look at the large dams, it would be more for energy, right? But this is looking at, all these dams of all different sizes. The reason that's put for the largest reason given for constructing these dams, it's recreation. It's interesting, right? I mean, building dams, create a pond so you can fish. Build a dam, create a lake so you can boat and do all that kind of thing. So now, again, this small fraction for hydroelectric is due to the fact that we're looking at 70,000 dams of all sizes. If we were to look at just the large dams, of course, this proportion would be much higher. But interestingly, we did have a lot of small dams that we built for hydroelectric too. There was one on Hominy Creek in West Asheville back in the day. There was one on the North Toe River up by Burnsville. Like, we used to build small dams for hydroelectric, but regardless, most recreation. What else? Flood control, fire protection. So some kind of safety issues. We wanted to build dams to try to reduce the impacts of these large floods. Because up to a certain extent, you can hold the floodwaters behind a dam and, let out a small amount of water over a long time, as opposed to it all coming at once in a flood. And then we got like 3,400. We don't know why they were built. They just, I don't know. They're just there. It's unknown why they were built. So how do these dams affect stream ecosystems? How would you think? Exactly. Yeah, we're turning a lotic system into a lentic system. And so I've broken it down a couple of different ways. So that's kind of the habitat alteration piece, right? So we know how different pools and riffles are in streams. Remember, like, so many more invertebrates in the riffles. Now imagine you take a large flowing stream and turn it essentially into one big pool. So I always love it when I get to talk about research that I actually did. I don't know, because it's fun. This is research I did with Jeremy Tiemann, who came and gave a seminar here. But so we were in Kansas for a couple of years, and there were these two low-head dams near Emporia, Kansas. And so we had 4 study sites near each dam, above and below each dam, and then also kind of distant from each dam. And this is kind of what it looked like. So not a huge dam. This is the upstream site. It just looks like a kind of a shallow, deep river, essentially, above this dam. It didn't create a massive reservoir. These dams are only like maybe 6, 8, 10 feet tall. Some of the fish here, this is a blunt-nosed minnow. This, I think, mimic shiner, some fishes out there. This is what it looked like downstream from the dam. This is me. This is Jeremy carrying our gear. So downstream of the river, how does this part look different just downstream from the dam? This is back before digital cameras had been invented. I had to scan like pictures of my actual photos. In fact, I didn't even know what electricity was then. No, I'm kidding. How does this look different? It's a dumb question. Why do I keep answering my own question? I don't know. Yeah, Brian. Yeah, it's spread out. We normally see a spread out wide channel like this when there are periods of really high flow that keep plants and things from getting established but then other times of low flow. So it's spread out. What about the substrate size here? I know you can't see in the stream, but this is essentially what it's like in the stream. It's pretty massive. It's like bedrock, so scoured. You can see some serious erosion going on here. Yeah, this is us downstream from one of the dams. This is Jeremy, this is me. We're doing kick scenes. A lot of fun. It's a fish called the red shiner, which is kind of a cool fish out west. So this is a fairly small dam. This is actually a water control dam for the city of Emporia. It's, I don't know, 6 to 8 feet tall, something like that. So this is us just downstream. You can see how shallow the water is, and you know, pretty shallow, higher flow. You got all the sediment that settles out behind this dam, so the water that comes over here is pretty clear. It's not carrying a lot of small suspended stuff. This is one of the reference sites. I don't know if you can see, but it's got a little bit of riffle pool development. This is a riffle down here, kind of a pool coming through here. I actually fell into the river right here in January. It was really cold. And there's this really cool fish called the Neosho Mad Tom. This is the Neosho River, by the way. Neosho Mad Tom. It's a little catfish about that big. It's a federally endangered fish, kind of cool. But it was found more common, as you might expect, at these sites kind of distant from the dam. I kind of asked this question already, didn't I? So about the habitat. So I'll just show you some numbers. So we did some similar stuff to what we do in this class. We measured the depth, the flow, the substrate size. And this is the upstream reference, upstream treatment, which means just above the dam, downstream treatment just below the dam, and then the reference. And then this is results of a ANOVA test to see if these averages varied among all these treatments. And these are the ones that differed significantly. Can anybody point out any of the differences among the different types of sites in these habitat variables? All of these differed significantly among the sites relative to their location to the dams. What do you think we concluded from these data? So these are, again, I've given you very little information, but so yeah, the units are here. So this is like, so substrate, it's like percentage composition of these different substrate types. Stream velocity, we calculated meters per second, depth in centimeters. What didn't we concluded, Olivia? Good, yeah, it's only one with bedrock, and that was because of that scour, right? All that water rushing over the dam. Good, anything else? And 40%, right? So almost half of the substrate there was bedrock. I mean, there was just no small stuff accumulating in the stream bed, you know? Yep, good, a lot shallower. And y'all probably could have told me this without looking at data, but you know, a lot deeper above the dam, about twice as deep on average. Yeah, so good. So I mean, so that's the kind of the general trend. And then like, so all these differences, right? And so, you know, if you're an invertebrate or a fish, of course, you're going to be living in different places based on the substrate that's there. So downstream from the dam, it was shallower, more bedrock. Stream velocity was also highest, right, as you might expect, lowest upstream. So this is kind of the trend. And this is this is interesting because, you know, people had documented this on large dams all over the place. So the question was like how much of a difference do these small dams have? Like if it's only 6-8 feet, like does it really impact the stream at all? So these data suggested that, yeah, you know, even these small dams, which are the majority of the 71,000 in the US, do appear to affect the habitat. Right? So then you'd expect that to affect the fish, invertebrates, everything else. So you just think about, you know, 71,000 times, right? We've built dams, probably 71,000 times there's been an impact like this. So you just kind of think of like the scale of you know, impact across the states of these. And of course, larger dams, larger impacts as well. Cool. And then we looked at some macroinvertebrates. And there's a lot of data in this paper. I may have told you all this, but one of the reviewers, when we submitted it to review, called our statistical analysis a fishing expedition because we had so many variables we were testing for differences in. They were probably right. But anyway, So he also, did the same thing that y'all did. Look, got lots of invertebrates, stored them to family. And these were families of invertebrates that had lower density at the treatment sites, right? That we found less of upstream and downstream from these dams. A couple families of Ephemeroptera, right? The Betidae, Heptageneidae. Hydrocycid caddisflies as well were less abundant in these middle treatment sites. Some coleopterans. And then there were a couple families that were higher in density at the treatment sites. In other words, they did better near the dams. These are things like Chironomidae, the midges, Culicidae. We know what the family Culicidae is? I'll give you a hint. Mosquitoes. Yes, mosquitoes. So mosquitoes, yeah, found a lot more upstream from the dams. And then some oligochaetes. Do you see any differences kind of qualitatively between the taxa that were less abundant near the dams and the taxa that were more abundant near the dams? Thinking big picture, as it were. Thinking of the orders. You're nodding your head, MC. Are you noticing anything? Or you just like got a cool song in your head? No. Yeah, the ones that had lower densities near the dam, those were the EPT taxa largely, right? The ones that are less tolerant, need higher quality. The ones that were more abundant near the dam were, the dipterans, right? The midges and the mosquito larvae, the oligochaetes, right? Those kind of aquatic earthworms. So yeah, like you look at that and say, building the dam probably negatively impacted the habitat stream quality. All right, this is a study. So still on the topic of habitat and how it negatively impacts species there. This is a study looking at freshwater mussels. And they looked at this river again out in Oklahoma. I need to find more examples that are not Oklahoma and Kansas. But anyway, I've got some. So they sampled this river, and as this river comes down, it has a couple reservoirs along it. And they just sampled all these sites, getting, some are close to the reservoir, some are further away. And they looked, first of all, at the number of mussels they found, so mussels per hour. And this is upstream, moving downstream. This is where the first reservoir was. This is the second reservoir. How is the reservoir affecting abundance of mussels along this river? So we're starting upstream, sampling mussels, they find a reservoir. We're not getting many mussels anymore. Then we start going a long ways downstream from that reservoir. A few start showing up, lots start showing up. Then the next reservoir and they drop out. So they actually coined the term an extinction gradient, which some people don't like. They say either you're extinct or you're not. Gradient is a weird word to use in association with extinction. But the point they were making was you're slowly losing species. Well, sorry. You've got all these species, and when the dam comes, boom, all of a sudden it creates habitat that none of them can live in anymore. And then as you get further and further from the dam, you start to pick up some species and add species as the habitat starts to more closely resemble the natural river, right? Then boom, another reservoir, no mussels. So the gradient comes into this idea that, certain species can do okay. Well, this is the total number. This is the number of species. Okay, certain species, can do all right, but we find the most species when we're a ways downstream from the reservoir. And then after the reservoir, we have to wait a while to pick them up again. So yeah, and they so this is 5 kilometers. So let's see, if from site 5 to 14, right? It takes like from site 5 to 14 for them to show up. So basically from here to here, so this is probably like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. It looks, just eyeballing it here, that building a reservoir here knocks out your muscle community for about 40 kilometers, just to put a distance on that, right? So that's a pretty significant impact. Okay, so we've got the habitat alteration, big deal. Another way they affect streams is facilitating invasion of non-native species. Now, why in general does habitat alteration go along with invasion of non-native species? As ecologists, why is that something that we might expect in many cases? Yeah, non-native species are going to prefer disturbed habitats. And why do they relatively do better in disturbed habitats compared to like native species? Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that what you're going to share, Torin? Yeah. So non-natives prefer disturbed habitats, which dams do. And the reason that non-natives generally prefer disturbed habitat is because they don't have to compete with native species that have evolved over thousands of years to live in that habitat, because the dams create a new habitat. If those species are trying to get a foothold in the natural river, you've got lots of species there that have evolved to live there, right? They're evolved to everything, right? But we would expect non-native species to do well where there's disturbance. All right. So this paper looked at watersheds all across North America, well, across the US and some of Canada, for 125 watersheds. And they looked at the number of introduced fish species. Fish don't fly. Well, some do. Most don't. So for them to get from one watershed to another, people have got to bring them there. So normally when we're talking about invasive fishes, it's because we brought them there. It's not because they're like invading from Mars in their little spaceships. Like, we brought them there. Now they're invasive, but we help them invade. So they looked at introduced fish species in all these different watersheds. And then they looked to see what variables best explained the number of introduced fish species in each watershed. They looked at a bunch of stuff, but one variable that was important, that was significant, was the number of reservoirs. So if you're looking in a river basin and you want to get an idea of how many non-native introduced species are there, one important thing to know is how many reservoirs are in the watershed. We found this when we were doing some research back, I think it was in 2010, and we were sampling in the Mud Creek watershed in Hendersonville. And we got several fish species there we got nowhere else. And full of reservoirs in that watershed. Lots of them, lots of ponds, lots of stuff. The other thing they did, which was interesting, was they looked at species and how many of them invaded drainages. So how many species invaded 0 to 10 watersheds, all the way up to how many species invaded 120 watersheds. What do you think they concluded from their data here? What's the main take-home message of this graph? Careful, if you move your hand, like, I'll call on you. It's like an auction. You're going to buy something. You're going to end up with an ugly sculpture that you didn't mean to buy at all. Right, exactly. So there are just a couple, maybe one species or two that invade lots of watersheds, right? They're like the kudzu of the fish world, right? But then you got a lot of species that can invade one or two, you know? So it's kind of interesting, right? It suggests that there are certain, I hate to say the word invaders because we're invading them. But so there's a couple species that are just getting everywhere. Then you got a lot of species that you find them, just every now and then, no big deal. So what, thinking that, remembering that these are fishes, what might it be about these species? What might allow them to be in just so many watersheds all over? Any thoughts? Good. So yeah, generalist species in general do better at invading than more specialist species. Yeah. And thinking about kind of their relationship with humans as well. Why do humans like to move fish around? Because it's fun. I mean, who doesn't? But in particular, yeah. So they looked at some of these species, and I apologize. These are just the scientific names, and you didn't have to learn any of them for this class. But just to does anybody know what species this is? Cyprinus carpio, introduced in 117 watersheds. Are you kidding me? What's Cyprinus carpio? Anybody know? Carp. The specific epithet sort of gives it away. The common carp. So here's the deal, though, you guys. They looked at all these species and they said, okay, how many are sport fish? We'll put an asterisk by them. Lots of them. How many of these are bait fish? We'll put a little dagger thing near them. Well, common carp is not considered either now. But when we brought them to the US from Europe back in the 1800s, I kid you not, they used to have like brass bands that would play when they brought the carp down to the river. Carp, man, they were living at large. They were on the late night talk show circuit. Everybody wanted a piece of common carp back then. Well, not so much now, but we can't get rid of them. So they're pretty much everywhere. And we don't want them anymore. It is what it is. Lots of lessons there. But then just a couple others. I don't know. Any fish heads in the group? Anybody else recognize some of these genera and some of these species up here? Or wait, no, we learned families. We didn't learn genera. So this is like a trout genus. So this is rainbow trout. This is goldfish. Again, we don't want them, but now they're everywhere. Brown trout, largemouth bass, grass carp, and then some bait fishes like fathead minnow. We actually got one of these, I think, Isabel, I think when we sampled for you at Beachy Creek, I think we got a fathead minnow, maybe? I could be wrong. Oh, golden shiner is what we got. Sorry, golden shiner. That's right, golden shiner, which I think, is it on here? Golden shiner is not. Anyway, so bait fish species and sport fish species. When we build a dam and create a reservoir, all of a sudden we can stock these large sport fishes. And so that's why reservoirs also increase the presence of all of these non-native species in the watershed. Cool. So we got habitat alteration. We got facilitating invasion of non-native species. Other thing that can happen is barrier to migration. And of course, we can all conceptualize this thinking of like the salmon swimming upstream, right? And of course, when you build a dam, the salmon has to jump really high to get over the dam, and it's hard. So we can't all do it. So don't all get up to reproduce. It's tough to be a salmon. So that certainly makes sense, right? That migratory fish species can't get past there. But it's interesting to think Who knew? Do dams affect migration of terrestrial plants? You guys, I got a terrestrial plant example here. How about that? Strangely, the answer is yes. If the answer was no, I probably wouldn't use it in my lecture. But anyway, so these folks looked at species composition in the riparian zone. So plant community composition in the riparian zone along impoundments. Impoundment is just another word for reservoir. Hope you guys realize that, right? Along impoundments and along free-flowing river sections. What they found was kind of interesting. It's kind of a weird statistical technique, but basically they found that that reservoirs entrap vascular plants that don't float really well. So a lot of plants, of course, disperse their seeds through water, among other mechanisms, right? Some that float very well, they'll float all the way down the reservoir, right? No problem. And they'll get washed up in places that are happy for them, that they can grow. But there are other vascular plants that don't float all that well, and they'll still get carried down if you've got good flow in the river. But once you build a dam, you don't have good flow anymore. And of course, a lot of those plants can't make it. So there is only a subset of terrestrial plants that sort of dominated in the riparian zone in these reservoirs. And your next question that's on the tip of your tongue, I'm not going to be able to answer. What are those plants? I should have looked that up and found examples. I didn't. I just thought this was interesting and included it. We could look this up. But suffice to say that these dams also affect composition of terrestrial plants in the riparian zone because they essentially create a barrier of downstream seed dispersal because the water is flowing so slow that a lot of plants, settle out to the bottom, which is not where terrestrial plants like to live. So pretty widespread impacts. American eel is back. That's all I have to say about that. When you take out dams, fish keep swimming. They don't stop swimming. And that includes the American eel. It's back. That's all I have to say. We're running short on time. Also, I forget if I mentioned this yet, but ecosystem processes function a little bit differently in reservoirs than in free-flowing rivers, right? So in a river or stream, we have a lot of mixing of water. We have highly oxygenated water. That's kind of what riffles do, right? They mix up the water with the air. But now you imagine a reservoir, right? It's deep, it's still. We can have hypoxia at the bottom, right? Where we don't have a lot of producers, but we have decomposition happening, which is burning up that oxygen. So we can have this anoxic layer at the bottom of reservoirs. So what that means is that the chemistry works a little bit differently in the bottom of these reservoirs than it works in rivers and streams. And when we have anaerobic respiration going on, our organic matter is going to get broken down not into carbon dioxide, but into methane ultimately, right? And this is problematic. Why? Yeah, because methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So methane production from the benthic zone of reservoirs is an issue that we're starting to learn more about. It also turns out, and I couldn't draw the chemistry out here for you, that production of methyl mercury, which is the biologically active form of mercury, happens under anaerobic conditions and anoxic conditions. The methylation of that mercury, I'm not sure why, I could probably figure it out if I looked into it, is more likely to occur in the absence of oxygen. So methyl mercury is the form of mercury that gets into fishes. It's biologically active, and a lot of lakes and reservoirs downwind from coal burning power plants have issues with mercury concentrations in fish tissue, because mercury is one of those chemicals that's associated with coal. And so when we burn coal, we release mercury into the atmosphere as well. And that when it lands in these reservoirs and settles down in the sediment, that's where it can become methylated. And then it can find its way into the food web. It could be because of consumption by benthic feeders like catfishes and things like that. It could be because something happens and the water gets stirred up and it gets up into the water column. But both of these are problems in the ecosystem, and they're much more prevalent in reservoirs than rivers and streams. Yeah, so this kind of, you could probably come up with some other impacts of dams on streams, but this is maybe a good short list to start with, shall we say. So, I don't know, I just want to show a couple of pictures, I guess. I was involved with this project in Nepal that was looking at the Karnali River, and it's one of the last free-flowing rivers in Nepal. This is a picture. We were doing some research, and we'd come down to the banks, and like all the folks in the village would come down and want to see what we're doing, and so we'd like hang out and chat with them. And really beautiful part of the world. But what's interesting about this is, so the red is the Karnali River here, and it takes this kind of hairpin turn. You see this? It turns down, almost kind of loops back on itself. So what they were planning to do was create a dam right here, right? They create a dam right here, but they wouldn't have the electric turbines right there at the dam. What do you think they do instead? Any ideas? This hairpin turn is an important part of it. Realizing that elevation, of course, drops along the length of the river. Yeah. What they would do is tunnel through the mountain to this downstream end and have the turbines down here. So on the one hand, it's good because you don't have to build as high of a dam to get the same elevational difference. But what might be the problem with that for the stream ecosystem, as opposed to just having a dam with the turbines right below it? Any thoughts? Yeah. So if we build the dam here, collect the water, and then shoot it through here, through the mountain, downstream to here, we don't have to build as big of a dam, don't have to inundate as large of an area upstream. But by diverting all that water through the mountain down here, we're going to be reducing the water to this loop here. So anyway, it may be a good news, bad news kind of scenario. I showed this picture to my colleague at Nepal. He's like, that is a really sad picture. This is them surveying. This is where that dam would be built. And you can see they've drilled like a test hole up here, essentially, that would go through the mountain and out the other side. And so here they're basically they're taking cores along here to see, how deep the river sediment goes, how deep the bedrock goes, to kind of figure out all that. Really pretty river, unfortunately. So these are some folks I worked with. He's actually starting a master's at Yale right now. There's some other folks from Kathmandu University. He's a professor at Kathmandu University, and it was a lot of fun. This is one of the sites way downstream that we looked at. So this is one that this probably wouldn't be all that affected. This is like a reference site. Some cool fish. These little puffer fish live down there. They're like, I'm bad, I'm a puffer fish. They fill up with water. They're like, I'm bigger than you think I am. You can't mess with me. This kind of funky shrimp looking thing. It's kind of interesting. This is an area of riffle. This is upstream that we sampled. And there are cool stuff living there, like these catfishes that have these either these suckers to attach to the bottom of the stream, or this sort of grooved ventral surface that they sort of use to attach to rocks. Really high flow velocity here, kind of tricky to sample with an electrofisher. This is upstream from where the dam is going to be built. This whole thing will be underwater. So sadly, like this whole village here will be underwater. Fishing is a big part of life here. So these folks were going to go and use this net to see what fishes live there. But there's migratory fish there, and people don't have any idea how they're going to be affected. It's a fish. It's a species of snow trout. It's got tiny little scales, big tail, real powerful fish. It's a fish called the mahseer. Can grow to be about 6 feet long, although this isn't. These are centimeters. This fish is like that big. But nobody really knows out there how these migratory fish are going to be affected. This is us getting stuck. Well, this Jeep getting stuck in the sand, so we had to pull them out. And so it's kind of cool. So I was involved with this project. It's kind of sad, actually. I was involved in it. We wrote a grant, got the money to go do all the work. It got delayed one semester, so I couldn't go. So someone else got to go. So that was nice. But this is an expedition on the Carnali to collect data from the headwaters all the way down. This is when I mentioned the torrent. There were some kayakers as well that did a first ascent of the river and took some video. It was pretty amazing. And this is kind of cool. So there are freshwater dolphins, which are found here, but they're almost extinct. So it's kind of cool. After I got back, they saw some freshwater dolphins down here, which is pretty awesome. So anyway, there are parts of the world that haven't yet built as many dams as the states have. So, it's this challenge of saying, well, you shouldn't build all these dams. And they're like, well, but you built a lot of dams and you developed. And we're like, yeah, but, and they're like, I told you so. And we're like, no, we didn't. No. So, so it's hard to be like, don't build those dams. It's not good. Y'all got 71,000 dams on y'all's rivers. What are you telling us not to build these dams over here? So anyway, it is what it is. But Nepal gets about 85% of their electricity from hydropower already. So if they build more dams at this point, it's to export the energy to India, is basically what it's for. Here in the States, we work through what's called the Federal Energy Relicensing Commission, FERC, to its friends. So here's the deal with FERC. So when any dam gets a hydropower license, those licenses can be anywhere between 30 and 50 years. So again, like of those 71,000 dams, not a lot of them are hydro, but some of the biggest ones are. So when these licenses come up, there's this process that happens. And one of those is that dams have to be brought into alignment with current federal regulations, and particularly environmental regulations, right? So, like most things, if you build something today, you have to build it to a higher standard than you would have had to like 30, 40 years ago, right? Like houses, like all that, right? So dams as well, when you come to relicense your dam, you usually have to make some pretty significant improvements. Now, because this is a federal agency, they work closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who makes recommendations concerning fish and wildlife, because that's what the Fish and Wildlife Service does. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service very often says, your dam now to be recertified has to have mechanisms in place to assist fish passage. So that wasn't such a big deal 30, 40 years ago. But now, when these licenses come up, it's often pretty expensive to go in and create these structures. So especially, if a dam is just there, but it's not producing all that much electricity, this might not be really attractive, right? To have to go in and kind of retrofit that dam. See a couple of folks still jotting things down, so I'll pause for a moment. And interestingly, this does relate to a fair amount of small dams too. There was a dam, the one that we studied the removal of up by Burnsville. It was only probably 8 to 10 feet high, but it had first been built for hydropower. So it still had to go through this process. The other option is for someone to buy the dam and not produce electricity. But, you know, why buy a dam that doesn't do anything, right? It's not a very popular option. These are what some of those fish passage devices look like, also known as fish ladders. All the fish, they can't climb ladders. They can't grab the rungs, you guys, but they can kind of jump up these steps, and people love it. People are just, they're like cheering on the fish when they're jumping. It's pretty cool. So, you know, this is what those structures would look like. Well, the other option, if you don't want to modify it, is to do what? Destroy it, take it out, remove the dam. So because of that, there's been a lot of dam removals happening lately. We're currently in the U.S. removing more dams than we're building. So we're kind of in that phase. So, you know, when you got a dam, even a small one like this, we've got our you know, our lentic section upstream, our lotic section downstream, and it looks like this, and we take the dam out, right? And so we kind of restore the free-flowing stream. What's that? This building up here? Yeah. Hard to tell. It looks like it's built like right next to it, but I don't know. You could look. This was I have some data on this, so just I got a picture from this river, but I know I have not visited this river nor this building, so I don't know. My answer is maybe. So you guys, HBI, does that look familiar? I mean, we call it the FBIBI. Hey, what does H stand for? What does H stand for, you guys? Oh, it should. But it stands for this dude, Hilsenhoff, this dude, yeah? This is Hilsenhoff's biotic index. You know that. You're all about that. So, and you know, it does the same thing. It tells you whether your samples are poor, fairly poor, fair, or good. Our samples are even better. Ours are like very good or excellent. Ours were so good. Man. It was awesome. So these authors looked at health of the river before and after removal of the dam. 2 dams, actually. And there are a bunch of sites. Just keep this in mind. All right. So this site is above dam number 2. So it's in the lentic pool above dam number 2. But you guys, what happened when they removed dam number 2? What happened to the quality at this site? What did Hilsenhoff's index say happened to the quality of the stream at this site when the dam was removed? Indeed it did. Here we are. I know it's hard to see because they kind of overlap. But yeah, so after that dam was removed, our invertebrate indices almost immediately went to fair to good. It's okay, you know, it's okay. But compared to the other sites nearby, you know, this is not Beachy Creek, right? This is not a creek that is in excellent to very good condition, right? It's I don't know, it's a Midwestern river. Some of them are kind of sad. Lots of sediment in them. They're kind of murky. So yeah, pretty sharp increase there. So definitely removing the dam improved the habitat quality upstream. This one was above dam number 1. It's kind of weird. They didn't collect data at the same time period, but essentially it was, yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm sorry. This was not at that site. I meant to change that, but didn't. This is when they actually sampled that site. So similarly, above the dam, got better. But notice the sites directly below the dam. Do they have as strong of an impact, removing the dam? No. So, I mean, just like we mentioned earlier, the biggest change is converting a lentic to a lotic system. That's the biggest improvement you can have. Because the biggest impact we have is turning a river into one gigantic pool. The sites just downstream from the dam were not in nearly as bad shape, or so the invertebrates say. So we did a study on the North Toe River. This is a tributary of the Nolichucky, which eventually finds its way into the Tennessee. And so we did something similar. We looked at sites above and below this dam, and then a little further distant. Really nice place. This is what's left of the dam. It had been partially breached already. It was only about 3 or 4 feet tall. And and it didn't have a big reservoir in back of it. So this is downstream from it. This is actually kind of a plunge pool downstream. And this is a picture of the dam itself. So this is a project the Fish and Wildlife Service took out this dam. And yeah, we did a similar thing. We looked at the SBIBI. We really did not see a big difference, either upstream or downstream. And I think this is just because there wasn't that giant pool above it. So I think the lesson that I've seen so far is like if dams create a large pool behind them, then taking them out can improve the habitat in that area. But if there's really not a big pool, because this is also a higher gradient stream, right? So when you got a higher gradient stream, the same height dam doesn't create as big of a pool as if you have like a lower gradient stream, right? So because there's less of a pool, there was just less potential for it to improve. But that's just the habitat alteration piece. It did allow species to migrate past here now, so that was a good thing. We didn't look at fish migration, we just looked at habitat alteration.